Shabbat Shalom, everyone. A bit of a gloomy morning here in Sag Harbor, but I checked the camera before I came in, and when it is on a gloomier day, the light shines in really rather beautifully here. I think it picks it up on the camera, which is cool. But as always, I wish you were here with me, but I will daven with full heart, because I know you're here with me in spirit. And it was a really lovely treat last week having Dr. Philip Lenskowski virtually join us. And I think that it worked well enough that we'll be able to do that again with a lot of you, with all of us, I should say. And hopefully that will be more frequent going forward. But in any case, it was a real treat. Felt a little less lonely last week. But not feeling lonely this morning, feeling excited to be able to celebrate Shabbat. So let's get started as we always do, just a little singing to warm ourselves up and to wake ourselves up. So join with me at home if you like. Yallai, lai, 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 yallai, lai, 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 yallai, lai, 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 yai, lai, 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 yallai, lai, 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 yai, lai, 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 yai, lai, 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 yai, lai, yai, lai, 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 yai, lai, 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 yai, lai, 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 yallai, lai, 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 yallai, lai, 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 yallai, lai, 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 yai, lai, 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 ai, lai, 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 yallai, lai, 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 ai, lai, 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 yai, lai, 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 ai, lai, ai, lai, 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 yai, lai, 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 yai, lai, lai, lai. Shabbat Shalom, everyone. Again, we'll begin our service on page 186, beginning with our thoughts oriented towards gratitude and thanks to our God for giving us the opportunity to be here and to be wherever you are and celebrating Shabbat together. Modeh ani lefanecha melech chai v'kayam. Modeh ani lefanecha melech chai v'kayam. Modeh ani lefanecha, modeh ani lefanecha. I offer thanks to you, Adonai, ever-living sovereign, that you have restored my soul to me in mercy. How great is your trust. Turn now to page 192, Ma Tovu, the very top of the page. Ma Tovu alecha Yaakov mishkenotecha Yisrael. Ma Tovu alecha Yaakov mishkenotecha Yisrael. We'll turn now together to page 194 and read the blessing for our bodies together in Hebrew at the top of the page. And if Hebrew is a little bit challenging for you, by all means pick one of the other readings on the page. There is the exact translation of the English at the bottom, interpreters on the left-hand side, and that's true really for our entire service. But we do try to bring in some Hebrew here where we can. So again, we're on page 194, and join with me if you choose. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher yatzar et ha'adam bechokma, uvara vo nekavim nekavim, chalulim chalulim. Galui v'yadua lifnei chisach vodecha, she'im yipatech echad mehem, o yisatem echad mehem, yefshar lehitkayem v'la'amod lefanecha. Baruch atah Adonai rofeh chol masar, u'afli la'asot. We're Now on page 196, a prayer for our souls, beginning at the top of the page. Elohai neshama shenatata bi tehorahi. 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 Join with me in English at the bottom of the page. My God, the soul you have given me is pure. You created it, you shaped it, you breathed it into me, and you protect it within me. For as long as my soul is within me, I offer thanks to you, Adonai, my God and God of my ancestors, source of all creation, sovereign of all souls. Praised are you, Adonai, in whose hand is every living soul, and the breath of humankind. Baruch atah Adonai, asher bi'ado nefesh kol chai, beruach kol nesaish. We rise in body or spirit as we turn to page 198, Nisim B'chol Yom, Blessings for Daily Miracles. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher natan lasach bivina, lafchin ben yom uven laila. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, pokeach ivrim. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, matir asurim. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, zokef kefufim. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, rokaret al hamayim. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, hamechin mitzad degaber. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, albish arumim. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, hanoten le'aev koach. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, hamavir sheina meinai, u'truma me'af apai. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, shasani b'tzelem Elohim. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, shasani ben chorin. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, shasani Yisrael. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, ozer Yisrael bigvura. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, oter Yisrael betifara. If you're still standing at home, please be seated as we turn to page 204 to offer a blessing for the study of Torah. First the Hebrew at the top of the page and then the English at the bottom. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. O Adonai, our God, let the words of Torah be sweet in our mouths and the mouths of your people Israel, so that we, our descendants and the descendants of all your people Israel, may know you by studying your Torah for its own sake. Blessed are you, Adonai, who teaches Torah to your people Israel. Baruch atah Adonai, hamelamed Torah le'amo Yisrael. Turn on page 206. Elu demarim shehin lahem shiur, she'adam ochel porotehem ba'olam hazeh, v'akeren kayemet lo le'olam haba ve'elu hen. Yibud avaim ugmilut chasadim, ve'hashkamat beit hamidrash shacharit ve'aravit, ve'achnasat orchim u'bikur cholim, ve'achnasat kalal bayat hamet v'yud tefila, ve'havat shalom ben adam la'chavero, ve'talmud Torah keneged kulam. We rise in body or spirit as we turn to page 212 with the opening blessing of Pezukei de Zimra. Baruch shehamar ve'haya haolam, Baruch hu, Baruch hoseh bereshit, Baruch omer ve'yosef, Baruch gozer
v'kayem. Baruch merachem al haaretz, Baruch merachem al habriot, Baruch meshalem sachar tov lirehav, Baruch alad v'kayam lanetzach, Baruch pohodeh u'matzil, Baruch shemo. Bishvachot uvizmirot negadelcha, u'nshavechecha nevarecha v'nazkir shimcha v'namlichecha malkeinu Eloheinu, Yachid chei olamim, melech meshubach u'meforadeh ad shemo hagadol, Baruch atah Adonai, melech mehulal batishvachot.
Turn now to page 214, and we start with the second verse down from the very top of the page.
Tov lehodot l'Adonai, Tov lehodot l'Adonai, ulezamer l'shimcha elyon, Tov lehodot l'Adonai, lehagid baboker chastecha, lehagid baboker chastecha, ve'emunatcha ba'leilot, ve'emunatcha ba'leilot, tov lehodot l'Adonai. Alei asur v'alei navel, alei gayon bechinor, Yisimachtani Adonai befoalecha, b'maaseh yadecha ranem. Magadu maasecha, me'od amku machshevotecha. Magadu maasecha, me'od amku machshevotecha. Magadu maasecha, me'od amku machshevotecha.
Now on top of page 215, and then we will continue silently to the bottom of the page and on to the next. Ashrei Yoshvei Veitecha, Ohodi Hallelujah, Ohodi Hallelujah. Ashrei Yoshvei Veitecha, Ohodi Hallelujah, Od Yaducha Selah Shem. V'anachnu nevarech ya, me'ata v'ad olam, me'ata v'ad olam, me'ata v'ad olam. Hallelujah, 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 hallelujah. Psalm 150, page 218. Hallelujah, 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 hallelujah,
Hallelujah, hallelujah, hallelujah. Hallelujah, El Bekocho. Hallelujah, Berkiauzo. Hallelujah, Bigvurota. Hallelujah, Kerov Kulo. Hallelujah, hallelujah, hallelujah. Hallelujah, hallelujah, hallelujah. Hallelujah, hallelujah, hallelujah. Hallelujah, hallelujah, hallelujah. Hallelujah, beteka shofar. Hallelujah, benebel bechinor. Hallelujah, betofu machol. Hallelujah, beminim vehugav. Hallelujah, hallelujah, hallelujah. Hallelujah, hallelujah, hallelujah. Hallelujah, hallelujah, hallelujah. Hallelujah, hallelujah, hallelujah. Hallelujah, betziltale shama. Hallelujah, betziltale trua. Kol hanshama tehallelujah. Hallelujah, hallelujah. Hallelujah, hallelujah, hallelujah. Hallelujah, hallelujah, hallelujah. We're on page 219. Nishmat kol echai tevarech et shimcha Adonai Eloheinu. Continue silently. Now on page 220, sorry. Ilufinu malehe shira kayam, ul shoneinu rina kamon galav, vesiftotenu shevach kemacheve rakia, veinenu meirot kashemesh vechayareach, Ve'yadenu frusot kenishrei shamayim, ve'raglenu kalot kayalot. Ein anachnu maspikim lehodot lecha, Adonai Eloheinu, ve'Elohei avotenu, ve'imotenu. Continue silently. Page 222, the second paragraph in Hebrew. Shochen ad marom v'kadosh shemo v'chatuv ranenu tzadikim b'Adonai la yesharim na'ava tehillah b'fi yesharim Titalalu divrei tzadikim Titbarach uvelshon lechasidim Titromamu v'kerev kedoshim Titkadash uvma kehalot Rivevotam chabet Yisrael berinait ba'am Shimcha malkeinu bechol dor Vador Yababahai Yababahai Bye 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 Yababahai Yababahai Bye 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 bye. Bye 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 bye. We rise in body or spirit for the concluding blessing of Pazukei Zimra on page 223. Ishtabach Shimacha Alad Malkeinu Ha'el HaMelech HaGadol VeHaKadosh B'Shamayim U'Haaretz Ki Lecha Na'eh Adonai Eloheinu Elokei Avotenu Ve'imotenu Shiru Shvachal El V'Zimra Ozu Memshala HaNetzach Gedula U'Pura Tila V'Tiferet Kedusha U'Malchut Brachot vehodot me'ata v'ad olam baruch ata Adonai El melech gadol batishbachot El hahodot Adonai niflaot Abochem b'shirei zimra melech elchei ha'olamim. We remain standing in body or spirit as we turn to page 224 for the Chatzi Kaddish and then the Baruch Hu on the page after that. Yitkadal v'yitkadash shemei Rabbah Be'alma librachirtei v'yamlich malchutei B'chaychon v'yamechon v'chayei l'chol Beit Yisrael Ba'agala v'zman kariv v'yimeru amen Yehi shmei Rabbah mevarach le'alam le'almei almayam Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitbahar v'yitramam v'yitnasem Vitadar vitale vitalal shemei dekucha brichu Leila min kol birchata v'shirata tushbechata v'nechamata Daviran be'alma b'imru Amen Barechu et Adonai hamevorach Baruch Adonai hamevorach Leolam va'ed. If you're still standing at home, please be seated as we turn to page 228. We'll begin by reading together in English at the bottom of the page, and then the 3 lines in Hebrew just above, beginning with the words Or Chadash. Praised are you, Adonai, our God, sovereign of the universe, creator of light and darkness, who makes peace and fashions all things. In mercy you illumine the world and those who live upon it. In your goodness you daily renew creation. How numerous are your works, Adonai, in wisdom you formed them all, filling the earth with your creatures. Be praised, Adonai, our God, for the excellent work of your hands, and for the lights you created, may they glorify you. Shine a new light upon Zion, that we all may swiftly merit its radiance. Praised are you, Adonai, creator of all heavenly lights. Or Chadash al Tzion Tahir. Or Chadash al Tzion Tahir. V'nizkechu lanu mehera le'oro. V'nizkechu lanu mehera le'oro. Yadadai bim bim bam, yadadai bim bam, yadadai bim bim bam, yadadai. Yadadai bim bim bam, yadadai bim bam, yadadai bim bim bam, yadadai baruch atah Adonai yotzer hameorot. We're now on page 230. We'll begin by reading together in English at the top of the page and then the Hebrew at the bottom. How deeply you have loved us, Adonai our God, gracing us with surpassing compassion. On account of our forebears whose trust led you to teach them the laws of life, be gracious to us, teaching us as well. O merciful one, have mercy on us by making us able to understand and discern, to heed, learn, and teach, and lovingly to observe, perform, and fulfill all that is in your Torah. V'ha'erinenu b'toratecha v'dabek libeinu b'mitzvotecha v'yachel levabeinu le'ahava u'yirah et shemecha v'lo nebosh v'lo nikalem v'lo nikashel le'olam va'em ki v'eshem kodshecha הגדול והנורא בטחנו, נגילה ונשמחה, נגילה ונשמחה בישועתך. והביאנו לשלום מארבע כנפות הארץ, ותוליכנו קוממיות לארצנו. כי אל פועל ישועות אתה ובנו בחרת, וקרבתנו לשמך הגדול סלע באמת. להודות לך יחידך באהבה, ברוך אתה אדוני הבוחר בעמו ישראל באהבה. We're now on page 232. Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. Now on page 234. ואהבת את אדוני אלוהיך בכל לבבך ובכל נפשך ובכל מאודך, והיו הדברים האלה אשר אנוכי מצווך היום על לבבך, ושינתם לבניך ודיברת בם בשבתך בביתך ובלכתך בדרך ובשוכבך ובקומך, וקשרתם לאות על ידיך, והיו לטוטפות בניניך, וכתבתם על מזוזות ביתך ובשעריך. We're now on page 236. ויאמר אדוני אל משה לאמור, דבר אל בני ישראל ואמרת עליהם, ועשו להם ציצית על כנפי בגדיהם לדורותם, ונתנו על ציצית הכנף בטיל תכלת, והיה לכם לציצית, וראיתם אותו, וזכרתם לכל מצוות אדוני ועשיתם אותם, ולא תטורו אחרי לבבכם ואחרי עיניכם אשר אתם זונים אחריהם, למען תזכרו עשיתם את כל מצוותיי והייתם קדושים לאלוהיכם. אני אדוני אלוהיכם, אשר הוצאתי אתכם מארץ מצרים להיות לכם אלוהים. אני אדוני אלוהיכם, אדוני אלוהיכם אמת. Let's read together at the top of page 239. Emet, there is no place where you are not, and even in the wilderness there is your word. Emet, that pen strokes of lightning, white fire, black flame, stir the soul's passion, guide our sacred way. True and enduring is Torah. Your truth for us is certain and established now and forevermore. Like Moses, Miriam, and all Israel, we sing out and rejoice. We're now on page 240. We're going to start at the bottom of page 238 and then on to 240. Last four lines in Hebrew, beginning with Tehilot Le'el Elyon. Tehilot Le'el Elyon, Baruch Hu Mevorach, Moshe u'Miriam u'Bnei Yisrael, Lechanu Shira, L'simcha Rabba ve'amru chulam, Mi chamocha ba'elim Adonai, Mi kamocha nedar ba'kodesh, Nora tehilot osef elem, Ay lai 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 lai, Shira chadasha shivchu gehudim, Leshimcha al svatayam, Yachad kulam hodu, Vehimlichu ve'ameru, Adonai imloch le'olam va'ed, Adonai imloch le'olam va'ed. Tzor Yisrael, Kuma be'ezrat Yisrael, Ufedechenu mecha Yehuda ve'Yisrael, Go'aleinu Adonai tzvahot shemo kedosh Yisrael, Baruch atah Adonai, begin the Amidah together on page 242 and then continue silently. Please go at your own pace, and when you're finished, you may be seated. Adonai sefatai tiftach, ufi yagid tehillatcha. Adonai, open up my lips, that my mouth may declare your praise. You're still completing your sound Amidah. Continue as you would like. For those that are finished, we're going to turn together to page 324, and we rise in body or spirit as we repeat the Amidah again, page 324. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu, Elohei Avotinu v'Imotenu, Elohei Abraham, Elohei Yitzchak, Elohei Yaakov, Elohei Sarah, Elohei Rivka, Elohei Rachel, Elohei Leah, Ha'el Hagadol, Hagibor v'Hanorah, El Elyon, Gomel Chasadim Tovim v'Koneh HaKol, v'Zocher Chasdei Avot v'Imahot, Umei Gdula Lifnei B'neihem, Leman Shemo Be'ahavah, Melech Hozer U'Moshiach U'Magen, Baruch atah Adonai Magen Abraham V'Ezrat Sarah, Atah Gibor Le'olam Adonai, Mechaye Metim Atara L'Oshia, Mashiv HaRuach Morid HaGashem, Mechalkel Chayim B'Chesed, Mechaye Metim L'Rachamim Rabim, Somech Noflim L'Rofech Ohodim, U'Matir Asurim, ומקיים אמונתו לשני עפר מחמוך בעל גבורות ומדם מלך מלך ממית ומחיה ומצמיח ישועה ונאמן אתה לחיות מתים ברוך אתה אדוני מחיי המתים. Now page 326. נקדש את שמך בעולם, כשם שמקדישים אותו בשמי מרום, הכתוב על יד נביאך, וקרא זה אל זה ואמר, קדוש, 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 אדוני צבאות, מלוך כל הארץ, כבודו. אדיר, אדירנו, אדוני, אדונינו, מאדיר שמך בכל הארץ. ברוך כבוד אדוני ממקומו. אחד הוא אלוהינו, הוא אבינו, הוא מלכנו, הוא מושיענו והוא ישמיענו ברחמיו לעיני כל חי. אני אדוני אלוהיכם, ימלוך אדוני לעולם. אלוהי ציון, kedushatcha nakdish, kedushatcha nakdish, v'shivchacha Eloheinu mipinu lo yamush, le'olam le'olam va'ed, Baruch atah Adonai, ha'el hakadosh. If you're still standing at home, please be seated. We're now on page 329. Ismechu v'malechutecha, shomrei, 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 Shabbat v'korei oneg Shabbat. Ismechu v'malechutecha, shomrei, 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 Shabbat v'korei oneg Shabbat. Aha mekadshei shemi Shabbat, kulam yismehu v'yitangu mituvecha Shabbat. Ismechu v'malechutecha, shomrei, 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 Shabbat v'korei oneg Shabbat. V'hashvi ratzita bo v'kidashto Shabbat. Emnat yamim oto kerata Shabbat. Ismechu v'malechutecha, shomrei, 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 Shabbat v'korei oneg Shabbat. Zecher lemase bereshit Shabbat. Zecher lemase bereshit Shabbat. Ismechu v'malechutecha, shomrei, 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 Shabbat v'korei oneg Shabbat. Eloheinu v'Eloi Avotenu v'Imotenu, ritzei, ritzei v'imnuchateinu. Kadeshenu b'mitzvotecha, v'ten chelkeinu b'toratecha. Sahabenu mituvecha, v'samechenu b'shuatecha. V'taher libeinu le'ovdecha be'emet, ve'anchileinu Adonai Eloheinu. Ay, nay, 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 nay. Ya nay, 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 ya nay, 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 nay. Ya nay, 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 ya nay, 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 nay. Ya nay, 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 ya nay, 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 nay. Be'ahava v'ratzon Shabbat kodshecha, v'nuchuva Yisrael mekadshei shemecha. Baruch atah Adonai mekadesh HaShabbat. We're now on page 330. We'll read together in English in the middle of the page. On this Shabbat day, as you graciously receive our prayers, help us to hear your call. Grant us enough health to fulfill our duties and the compassion we need to attend to others. Teach us humility that we may perceive our own faults, and grant us the wisdom to be forgiving of others. Give us the courage to be true to our highest selves and the charity to see the best in those around us. Give us patience enough not to become discouraged, hope enough to overcome all fears for the future, and faith enough to know your presence. O source of blessing, look with favor upon us. May our offerings be acceptable to you. Baruch atah Adonai, she'otcha levatcha b'yirah na'avod. We'll turn now to page 332, and we'll read together, beginning at the bottom of the page, each paragraph in English, and conclude each paragraph with the Hebrew words, Modim anachnu lach, offering our gratitude to God. For the expanding grandeur of creation, worlds known and unknown, galaxies beyond galaxies filling us with awe and challenging our imaginations, Modim anachnu lach. For this fragile planet Earth, its times and tides, its sunsets and seasons, Modim anachnu lach. For the joy of human life, its wonders and surprises, its hopes and achievements, Modim anachnu lach. For human community, our common past and future hope, our oneness transcending all separation, our capacity to work for peace and justice in the midst of hostility and oppression, Modim anachnu lach. For high hopes and noble causes, for faith without fanaticism, for understanding of views not shared, Modim anachnu lach. For all who have labored and suffered for a fair world, who have lived so that others might live in dignity and freedom. Modim anachnu lach. For human liberties and sacred rights, for opportunities to change and grow, to affirm and choose. Modim anachnu lach. We pray that we may live not by our fears, but by our hopes. Not by our words, but by our deeds. Baruch atah Adonai, hatov shimcha, ulechana lehodot. Prayer for Peace, Sim Shalom, page 334. Sim Shalom, Torah uvracha, chen v'chesed, v'rachamim aleinu, ve'al kol Yisrael, amecha, barcheinu yatzreinu kulanu kechad, ve'or panecha. Ki be'or panecha natata lanu, Adonai Eloheinu. Sim shalom, tova uvracha, chen v'chesed, rachamim aleinu, ve'al kol Yisrael, amecha, Torat chaim, ve'ahavat chesed, Utzedaka uvracha verachamim nechaim neshalom. Sim shalom tova uvracha, chen v'chesed verachamim aleinu, ve'al kol Yisrael amecha, ve'tov beinecha levarech et amcha Yisrael. Bechol et ubechol sham bishlomecha. Sim shalom tova uvracha, chen v'chesed rachamim aleinu, ve'al kol Yisrael amecha. Baruch atah Adonai, Hamevarech et amo Yisrael b'shalom. Let's read together on the top of page 337. Prayer is not purely an act. All things pray, and all things pour forth their souls. The heavens pray, the earth prays, every creature and every living thing. In all life there is longing. Creation is itself but a longing, a kind of prayer to the Almighty. What are the clouds, the rising and the setting of the sun, soft radiance of the moon and the gentleness of the night? What are the flashes of the human mind and the storms of the human heart? They are all prayers, the wordless outpouring of boundless longing for God. Oseh shalom imromav, hu yaseh shalom aleinu, ve'al kol Yisrael, ve'al kol yoshvei tevel, yaseh shalom, shalom aleinu, ve'al kol Yisrael, yaseh shalom, shalom aleinu, ve'al kol Yisrael. We're now on page 362. We rise in body or spirit as we begin Seder Kriyat HaTorah, the Torah service, again on page 362. Ein kamocha Elohim Adonai, ve'ein kemasecha malchutcha malchut, kol olamim u'memshaltecha bechol dor b'dor. Adonai melech, Adonai malach, Adonai yimloch le'olam va'ed, Adonai oz nemo yitein, Adonai yivarech et amo v'shalom. Abba harachamim, eitiva b'rtzoncha, et Zion, tivnei chomot Yerushalayim, ki becha levad batachnu, nelech el ram v'nisa, Adon olamim. Ki mitzion tetzei Torah, Mitzion Tetzei Torah Udevar Adonai Umni Yerushalayim Baruch Shenatan Torah Torah Baruch Shenatan Torah Torah Le'amo Yisrael B'Kdushato Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad Echad Eloheinu Gadol Adonenu Kadosh Shemo Gadol Adonai Tiyu Neromima Shemo Yachdav Lecha Adonai Hagedula Ve'hagevura Ve'atiferet Ve'hanetzach Ve'havod Ki chol b'shamayim u'ba'aretz Ki chol b'shamayim u'ba'aretz L'cha Adonai Hamamlacha ve'amit na'aseh lechol erosh Romemu Adonai Eloheinu ve'ishtachavu le'har kodsho Romemu Adonai Eloheinu ve'ishtachavu le'har kodesho. Shabbat Shalom, everyone. If you're still standing, please be seated. So this morning we read from Parshat Tetzaveh, the second parsha that is, as I explained last week and in years past, part of a 5-part series of parashiyot that relate to each other in the sense that the first two, Truma and Tetzaveh, talk about the instructions for the building of the Mishkan and for its sacred vessels and for its sacred vestments, as in clothes. And then the final two parshas, talking about the actual construction, and the middle being Parshat Ki Tisa, in which we are going to get a description next week of the building of the golden calf and the repercussions that result from that. But this week's parsha, if last week was really talking about the building of the Mishkan, and just as a quick aside, for those of you that were in Torah study last week, Judy Hollander asked a very interesting question about the distinctions between the Mishkan and the Ohel Moed and locations of both of them in relation to each other. So I did some work over the week, which I'll share again in Torah study. But our conversation will be a little bit different this morning. But again, last week was really focused on the structure itself, right, on the Mishkan itself and how it was to be built and who was to build it and how the materials were meant to be collected and what its ultimate purpose was, which was to build a sacred area for God to reside either amongst the people, in the people, various readings of it, but in essence, to build this thing that we refer to as the Mishkan, the residing place of God's presence for our ancestors in the desert. So this week's portion deals with a little bit more of the sacred vessels. We get at the end of the portion, which I'll actually chant in a little bit, about the altar and about incense that is offered on that altar. But most of the parsha is really dealing with what we would call the sacred vestments, the clothes that the high priest and the priests ultimately all together were meant to wear as they fulfilled their duties in the Mishkan. And this description and these behaviors and these clothes were meant to also carry forward to the service in the temple itself once it's constructed in the land of Israel. So we get a lot of, again, as last week, a lot of minute details, a lot of details about both the style, the look, the material, and also the purpose behind all of this. So we get just one thing that I want to focus on this morning, though, is a sort of interesting verse that we get. It's chapter 28, verse 43. So if you're following at home, our Torah reading will be a little bit further on in the Parsha. But if you would like to sort of follow where I am in the text, the Plav Chumash would be on page 567. And in the Women's Torah Commentary, and we're looking for the end of chapter 28, would be on page 482. So again, 482 in the Women's Commentary, and 567 in the Plav Chumash. And this last set, right, is describing again all these things that Aaron and Aaron's sons, as in the Kohanim, ultimately have to wear, and sashes and hats and undergirdings and things of that nature. And then we get in verse 43 the following. They shall be worn by Aaron and his sons when they enter the tent of meeting, or when they approach the altar to officiate in the sanctuary, so that they do not incur punishment and die. It shall be a law for all time for him and for his offspring to come. Okay, so in other words, if Aaron and his sons, when they enter the tent of meeting, or when they approach the altar to officiate in the sanctuary, that'll be another piece we'll talk about more in Torah study, about the distinction between those two things, so that they do not incur punishment and die. In other words, that the choice of clothing is not optional, and it is certainly not for the sake of haute, what's the word I'm looking for? Haute couture, right? It's not about showing off. There is something much deeper here, because if there wasn't, there certainly would not be a risk of death at wearing, for example, orange pants instead of white pants, right? Or forgetting to put on the sash in the proper way. So there must be something more to this. So I want to share first a medieval teaching from Chizkuni. Chizkuni is a French rabbi, 13th century, if I remember correctly. His actual name I'm forgetting, Chanoch ben Manoach, I think. But Chizkuni's works and commentary on the Torah is one of the most commonly searched or looked to when there is some complication in the text. So he talks about this verse, and in particular this prohibition or this idea that if they don't do this, they will incur guilt and die. So he points to Rashi's commentary first, and he says, Rashi's commentary on this phase says as follows. From this verse, we learn that appearing in the temple without the appropriate garments is a capital offense. Okay, but ultimately speaking, in the Talmud, it gives us a further explanation in Talmud Sanhedrin, page 83. When a priest wears the priestly garments in the temple, he is considered as a priest. When he does not, he is considered as a non-priest, who is forbidden to enter the temple on pain of death. Even omitting his belt is considered as being disrobed. There are some dissenting views as to whether or not the punishment should be the death penalty, but there is no question amongst the commentators of the Gemara, or ultimately speaking of the medieval period, on the fact that there is a real clear message here, which is that these clothes are essential to the task, and that really most interestingly, I think what Chizkuni is pointing out, or what Rashi is ultimately pointing out, is that when the clothes are on, the priests are in their role, and they are recognized as such. When their clothes are off, right, when they're wearing their regular clothes and walking around going to the supermarket, they are not to be considered in the same kind of way. So the clothes, in the essence, right, it's not that they make the person, because we know that the Kohanim are the only ones who are allowed to do this in any case, but there does seem to be an added layer here, that there is some distinction between when they are fully in their uniform and what functions they play in their society at that time, and then ultimately what is meant to happen outside of that. So now I want to bring in a more contemporary voice, which is actually a colleague of mine, Ann Luz, who's an incredible rabbi in California, in Los Angeles. Her name is Rabbi Sarah Bassin. If you don't know Sarah Bassin, look her up. She's a rather remarkable person. And she is now, if I'm not mistaken, she was the associate rabbi of Temple Emmanuel Beverly Hills, but she may be the senior rabbi now, and I apologize if I am not giving her the due covet that she deserves, but certainly that she is a essential part of that community, which is a very large and very significant congregation in Los Angeles, if you don't know. So she wrote something about this parsha a few years ago that it always sort of stuck with me, and I went back to it again after reading this line from Chizkuni, because she'll see very quickly how she takes this idea and brings it into something that feels a lot more resonant right now. So she writes as follows. In Parshat Tetzaveh, the artisans who craft the tabernacle and the menorah are also given instructions to craft the clothing for the priests. This added task catches the eye of the commentator Sforno. Not only, quote, should they build the tabernacle, provide oil for the menorah, but they should also fashion the garments to be worn by Aaron. There's something significant to Sforno in the fact that the architects of a sacred space also designed the sacred attire. When the artisans designed the priestly clothing, they diminished the distinction between the priest and the institution the priest serves. And just as with the construction of the tabernacle, the gifts of the people provide the raw material for the priestly clothes and the accessories. Our place of our worship has the investment of the people, and so too do the priestly garments. The symbolism is clear, she says. When the people are investing our time, money, and hope in the priests, please don't let us down. We use the clothing of the priesthood as a way to express our expectations of them. And now Rabbi Bassin quotes another great writer, another great thinker, Aviva Zornberg, in her book, The Particulars of Rapture, who captures what lies beneath the surface of the text. Quote, "The high priest's vestments invest him in anxiety, no less than in glory. Ultimately, it is not only the clothing that is to be, quote, holy to God, but its wearer. If the dissonance between vestment and wearer is palpable, the trappings become hollow." It bears repeating, says Rabbi Bassin. If the dissonance between vestment and wearer is palpable, the trappings become hollow. In other words, if the person fails to live up to the expectations of the office is in danger of losing its power. So her main question, in essence, is to ask, really, is it fair and should we hold the people who fill the roles that are of an equivalency, for example, of the priesthood to our ancestors in the desert to us today? Do we hold them, and should we hold them, to a higher standard? One in which, again, if their behavior is not appropriate to the task, if they don't represent the institution and the uniform, and they behave in such a way that causes a pain to either of those entities or both, is it fair for us to be more upset? Right? Is it fair to hold them to a higher standard than anybody else? So Rabbi Bassin continues, if we know the politicians and athletes and actors often do reprehensible things while wearing the garments of their station, we become tempted not to hold such expectations at all. In other words, especially these days, it feels like a lot of people's childhood heroes, athletic heroes, political heroes, comedic heroes have done or have continued to do really terrible kinds of things. So what she is saying is that in those circumstances, we start to feel like maybe we shouldn't hold anybody to any expectations. Right? Maybe it's wrong to put all of our hopes onto others in the first place. And she continues, maybe we shouldn't put so much effort into creating the priestly garments to begin with. Quote, let them fulfill their technical duty, we might say. I don't need to know what kind of persons they are beyond their technical scope. However, she says, when we bear witness to acts of scoundrelism in the public eye, we cannot and should not shrug it off. We cannot adjust to a new normal. We must hold fast to our expectations of our priests, of our politicians, of our entertainers, our athletes, and our rabbis. Because at the end of the day, those expectations are not actually about the people who hold the office or wear the uniform. They're about us. When we hold our leaders to a higher standard, when we hold our heroes to a higher standard, when we hold the people who entertain us to a higher standard, or ultimately who are our spiritual guides, we are more likely to do the same for ourselves. So how does this all come back to the priestly vestments? I think really what Rabbi Bassin is talking about is sort of understanding the fact that the priests themselves, the clothes that they wear, the acts that they take, they represent something larger than the individual. Right? They represent something larger than Aaron and his sons only. They represent a concept of an idealism, a hope in a certain kind of purity. And certainly I think what we can acknowledge from Chizkuni is the reality that, people serve in roles all the time. They're still human beings. They're still going to make mistakes when they take the clothes off, when they take the stripes off their arm, when they take the kippah off, so to speak. They are, they deserve some kind of space to be considered also as regular human beings. But Rabbi Bassin pushes back, I think, on that idea. When the reality is that that's too simplistic of an idea. Yes, we're all human beings. Yes, we all make mistakes. Yes, we need to be given opportunities for forgiveness and all of those kinds of things. But there is a very important piece of all this, which is that when the building of the Mishkan takes place, and the building of all the vestments and all the vessels, when all of it is happening, it is built in an idealistic way. It is built as an embodiment of a pure enough place that God's presence can reside in this world. It needs to be held to a higher standard. There need to be elements of it that cause us to revere and to respect. There are things that we ultimately need as signposts. And I think what Rabbi Bassin is talking about is that while there is a compulsion for us, and certainly a sympathetic eye, even a compassionate eye, to be understanding and forgiving of those who make mistakes in their roles, we have to be sure that we don't go so far in swinging the pendulum that we cease to understand that when we do not hold our institutions, our positions of power, our positions of influence to that higher standard, expecting more of them, and I'll put, again, small-town rabbi in that conversation, there is a real danger. of ultimately allowing for our collective values to go along with it. We all need paradigms, we all need inspiration, we all need things to look at that will remind us of the task. And I think that's a big part of the sacred vestments that are described in this week's portion. They are what they are, as Rabbi Bassin points out, they are created in the same way as the Mishkan, both by the hands of the people and by the materials of the people. It is a representation of the people's will. And whoever it is, be it Aaron or Aaron's sons, or ultimately speaking, the generations of Kohanim that followed, anyone who were to step in those roles of leadership, Moshe included, we need to understand and to look at them as symbolic exemplars, and to hold those symbolic exemplars, especially those that represent an idea, to a higher standard, so that we ultimately ourselves can hold ourselves to a higher standard as well. So with that, I wish you a Shabbat Shalom. I urge you, again, if you have not ever encountered Rabbi Bassin or her teachings, I think these days a lot of stuff is online that you can find. She's really a remarkable person, and I like to think, at least, that Lou and I are friends of hers and her wonderful husband. It's been a number of years since we've seen them. We were at a wedding together not so long ago, but somebody who I greatly admire, and when I have a chance to study from, even if it's over a camera. So with that, I wish you all a Shabbat Shalom. As I said, we're going to read from a little bit later, really the last the last aliyah in the reading, which begins at the beginning of chapter 30. If you're following the Cloud Chumash, that's on page 571. And if you are in the Women's Torah commentary, that will begin on 487 and quickly move on from there. Again, 571 in the Plav Chumash, 487 in the Women's Commentary, and if you're following on some other means at home, you're looking for Exodus chapter 30, verse 1. Baruchu et Adonai HaMorach. Baruch Adonai Baruch Le'olam Va'ed. Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher bachar banu mikol hamim v'natan lanu et Torato. Baruch Atah Adonai noten haTorah. Amen. V'asita mizbeach miktar ketoret atzei shitim taseh oto. Ama orko ve'ama rochbo rabua yem va'amataim komato mimenu karnotav ve'tzipita oto zahav tahor et gago ve'et kirotav saviv ve'et karnotav asita lo zer zahav saviv ushetei tapot zahav taselo mitachat lezero al shetei tzalotav ta'aseh al shenei tzitav ve'haya levatim Laset oto bahema, asita et habadim atzei shitim, vetzipita otam zahav, venatata oto lifnei haparochet, asher al aron haidut, lifnei hakaporet, asher al haedut, asher ibaed lecha shaman, Veiktir alav Aharon ketoret samim baboker behetivo et hanerot yaktirena uvha'alot Aharon et hanerot ben ha'arbaim yaktirena ketoret tamid lifnei Adonai ledorotechem Lo ta'alu alav, ketoret zara ve'ola umincha, ve'nesech lo tischu alav, ve'chiper Aaron al karnotav, achat bashana, midam chatat hakipurim, achat bashana, יכפר עליו לדורותיכם, קודש קדשים הוא לאדוני. ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם אשר נתן לנו תורת אמת וחיי עולם נטע בתוכנו ברוך אתה אדוני נותן התורה. We'll turn now to page 371 to offer our Mishaberach this morning. And in a moment I'll read our list, but of course invite you to think of your loved ones at home. And if they are not on our list and you'd like to add them to our list, please contact me and I'd be happy to add their names as well. And page 371. Mishaberach Avotenu ve'imotenu Abraham Yitzchak ve'Yaakov Sarah Rivka Rachel Leah hu yivarech et hacholim ha'elu. We think this morning of Rachmiel ben Hinda, Paloma Chow Juan, Samuel Moskowitz, Audrey Lubo, Virginia Tizer, Ibi Romano, Chaim Leib, Andrew Edelman, Robert Posner, Joyce Weinberg, Rick Gold, Stu Pollack, Jane London, Catherine Guarino, Emunah Chaba, Sandra Furman, Raina Walsh, Deirdre Klein, Stephanie Skid, Judy Stern, Miriam Cornfield, Roz Brody, Chana Ruth Batsara, Marlise Silverberg, Susan Spruce, Fagel Tzipora Bat Elisheva, Elisheva Batsara, Richard Gambino, Michelle Sawicki, Idol Basha Bat Yitzchak, Tzvi Menachem and Chaim, Rivka Bat Devora, Amy and Gavin Tucker, Janice Kurz, David Dowling, Neil Elliott and Eileen Rosen, Israel ben Yitzchak, Ben Sion ben Moshe, Lorraine Danis, Buddy Kasaf, Shelley Newmark, David Kyle Klotman, Rivka Bat Rachel, Sarah Bat Chana, Moshe Eliezer ben Sibia, Peretz ben Yehuda, Leah Bat Naomi, George and Nancy. As I said, if you're thinking of anyone else this morning who's in need of healing, we'll hold them in our hearts as we continue. HaKadosh Baruch Hu Yimalei Rachamim Alehem L'Hachalimam L'Rapotam L'Chazikam V'Yishlach Lehem Mehira Refuah Refuah Shlema Min HaShamayim Refuat HaNefesh Refuat HaGuf Hashtabag Alav Zman Kariv Ben Omar Amen. May the one who blessed our ancestors Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, and Leah bless and heal those who are suffering. May the Blessed Holy One be filled with compassion for their health to be restored and their strength to be revived. May God swiftly send them a complete renewal of body and spirit, and let us say together, Amen. El na refana la, el na refana la, el na refana la, refuah shelema, el na refana lo, el na refana lo, el na refana lo, refuah shelema. We'll turn now to page 370. I am still recovering a bit from my back, so I'm not going to do our lifting Hagbah as we normally do, but we will dress and return the Torah to its coverings, speaking of. And again, we're on page 370, and the tradition to rise has to do usually with the Torah being lifted. However, I think in this case we will still say we rise in body or spirit. Again, we're on the bottom of page 307. Vezot haTorah asher sam Moshe lifnei bnei Yisrael al pi Adonai biyad Moshe. Torah, 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 Torah tziva lanu Moshe. Torah, 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 Torah tziva lanu Moshe. Torah, 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 Torah tziva lanu Moshe. Torah, 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 Torah tziva lanu Moshe. Torah, 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 Torah tziva lanu Moshe. Okay, if you're still standing at home, please be seated. Our Haftarah this morning comes from the prophet Ezekiel, and the reading is found on page 577. And as always, the connecting piece between the Parsha and the Haftarah is there. In this case, we'll see as this is a description again of all of the things that would go into the Mishkan and eventually would go into the temple. Ezekiel here is talking about a prophetic vision of really because remember, he's prophesying out in exile. So the idea of being able to return to the land of Israel and to build what in effect would be another temple, a new temple. So on the one hand, there will be a lot of recurring themes. On the other hand, it makes for an interesting bit of contrast between what's being described in the portion and what's being described by Ezekiel in his vision. So again, the reading is on page 577 in our Chumash if you have it. And if you're following online in some other form, you're looking for Ezekiel chapter 43, verses 10 to 27. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher bachar b'mim tovim v'ratza b'divrehem hanemarim be'emet. Baruch atah Adonai habocher b'Torah u'Moshe abdo u'Yisrael amo b'nvi'eh ha'emet b'tzedek. Now you mortal, describe the temple to the house of Israel, and let them measure its design, and let them be ashamed of their iniquities. And when they are ashamed of what they have done, show them the plan of the temple, its arrangements, its exits and entrances, and all its rules and regulations. Write it down in their sight so that they can follow and keep its entire plan and its rules. This is the law of the temple. The whole area on top of the mountain all around it is most holy. Such is the law of the temple. Here are the dimensions of the altar, in long cubits whose length is a regular cubit and a handbreadth. Its foundation shall be 1 cubit deep and a cubit wide, with a border around the edge measuring a span in width. This is the height of the altar. From the foundation on the ground to the lower ledge, 2 cubits with a width of 1 cubit, from the smaller to the larger ledge. 4 cubits with a width of 1 cubit. The hearth shall be 4 cubits, and 4 horns are to rise up from the earth. The hearth shall be 12 cubits long and 12 cubits wide, squared in its 4 equal sides. The ledge shall be a square of 14 cubits by 14, with 4 equal sides, with a surrounding border of a half cubit, and the surrounding base 1 cubit. Its ramp shall face the east. Then God said to me, Mortal, thus says the eternal God, these are the rules for the altar, on the day it is built, for offering whole burnt offerings and for sprinkling blood in it. To the Levitical priests who are descended from Zadok, and therefore draw near to serve me, says the Eternal One, give a young bull of the herd for a purgation offering. Take some of its blood and put it on the 4 horns of the altar, the 4 corners of the ledge, and the surrounding border, and thus shall you purify it and wipe it clean. Then take the bull of the purgation offering and burn it at the appointed place in the temple outside the sanctuary. On the next day you shall offer a goat without blemish as a purgation offering, purifying the altar from sin as you purified it with the bull. When you are done with the purification, offer a young bull of the herd and a ram from the flock, both without blemish. Offer them to the Eternal, and let the priest throw salt on them, and sacrifice them as a whole burnt offering to the Eternal. Every day for 7 days you shall provide a goat as a purgation offering, as well as a young bull of the herd and a ram from the flock. All of them must be without blemish. For 7 days you are to purge the altar and purify it and consecrate it. And when those days are passed, from the 8th day onward, the priest shall present your burnt offerings and your offerings of well-being on the altar, and I will show you favor, says the eternal God. And we go back to our Sidurim, our prayer books, to page 372 for the concluding blessing of the Haftarah. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, tzur kol haolamim, tzadik bechol adorot, האלוהים האומר ויוסף המדבר ומקיים שכל דבריו אמת וצדק על התורה ועל העבודה ועל אלוהים ועל יום השבת הזה שנתת לנו אדוני אלוהינו לקדושה ולמנוחה לכבוד ולתפארת על הכל אדוני אלוהינו אנחנו מודים לך ומברכים אותך יתברך שמך בפי כל חי תמיד לעולם ועד Baruch atah Adonai mekadesh ha-Shabbat. Amen. We rise in body or spirit as we offer first a blessing for our country and then for the state of Israel, beginning with the one for our country on page 376, beginning in the middle of the page. Thus says Adonai, this is what I desire, to unlock the fetters of wickedness and untie the cords of lawlessness, to let the oppressed go free, to break off every yoke. Share your bread with the hungry and take the wretched poor into your home. When you see the naked, give clothing and do not ignore your own kin. If you banish the yoke from your midst, the menacing hand, the evil speech, if you offer compassion to the hungry and satisfy the famished creature, then your light shall shine in darkness. O guardian of life and liberty, may our nation always merit your protection. Teach us to give thanks for what we have by sharing it with those who are in need. Keep our eyes open to the wonders of creation and alert to the care of the earth. May we never be lazy in the work of peace, and may we honor those who have died in defense of our ideals. Grant our leaders wisdom and forbearance. May they govern with justice and compassion. Help us all to appreciate one another and to respect the many ways that we may serve you. May our homes be safe from affliction and strife, and our country be sound in body and spirit. Amen. And a prayer for the state of Israel on page 377. Avinu shebashamayim tzur Yisrael v'goalo barech et medinat Yisrael reshit tzmichat gulatenu. Hagen aleha be'evrat chastecha ufros aleha sukat shlomecha. Ushlach orcha ba'amitcha l'rasheha sareha v'yoatzeha. V'taknem be'etzat tova milfanecha v'natata shalom ba'aretz l'simchat olam le'yoshveha v'nomar. Amen. O Heavenly One, Protector and Redeemer of Israel, bless the state of Israel which marks the dawning of hope for all who seek peace. Shield it beneath the wings of your love, spread over it the canopy of your peace. Send your light and truth to all who lead and advise, guiding them with your good counsel. Establish peace in the land and fullness of joy for all who dwell there. Amen. We remain standing in body or spirit as we turn to page 374 to return the Torah to the Ark. Again, page 374. Yehalelu et Shem Adonai, ki niskav shemo levado, hodo al eretz v'shamayim, v'yaharem keren li'amo, tehila lechol chasidav, livnei Yisrael am kerovo. Hallelujah, hallelujah. Ki lekach natati lachem torati al tazovu et chaim ehi lama chazikim ba v'tomecheham meusham deracheham darchei noam v'chol netivoteha shalom hashivenu Adonai elecha ben hashuvam chadesh chadesh yameinu chadesh yameinu kekedem. Remain standing in body or spirit as we turn to page 586 at the bottom of the page. Aleinu l'shabeach. Aleinu l'shabeach l'adon hakol atet kedua le'yotzer breshit shelo asanu ki oyeh haratzot velo samanu kemishpechot ha'adama shelo samach chelkenu kahem v'gor aleinu kechol hamonam. ואנחנו קוראים ומשתחווים ומודים לפני מלך מלכי המלכים הקדוש ברוך הוא. We're now on page 588. שהוא נוטה שמיים ועושה לארץ ומשה ביקרו בשמיים ממעל ושכינתו זו בגובה מרומים הוא אלוהינו אינו אמת וקינו אפס זולתו ככתוב בתורתו וידעת היום והשב אותה אל לבביך כי אדוני הוא האלוהים בשמיים ממעל ועל הארץ מתחתנו. ונאמר והיה אדוני למלך על כל הארץ ביום ההוא יהיה אדוני אחד ושמו invite those in mourning and those observing yard site to remain standing in body or spirit as we first remember those who have passed in recent months. Miles Ambrose, Fred Eber, Nancy Fisher, Saul Fisher, Edwin Friedman, Sandra Friedman, Lucy Gladstone, Lois Herr, Phyllis Katz, Laura Kurz, Madge Judith Parcher, Steve Popkin, Vera Shaps, Norma Small, Marjorie Weinberg Berman, and Ann Weiss. We also mark the yard sites that occurred during the last week for Paul Aaron, Sylvia Birkin, Morris Busbang, Arlene Collins, Ida Goldfarb, David Gross, Doris Harlan, Ray Schwartz-Katz, Ida Klitnick, Harry Koplovich, Elsie Chris, Jake Krotman, Harold Levine, Estelle Liu, William Miller, Harry Osofsky, Bruce Polchek, Alexandra Pomeroy, Herman Press, Selma Press, Jenny Rodney, Michael Ruckin, Henrietta Sanborn, Jeanette Schwartz, Ray Soffer, Louise Spitz, Celia Steinbeck, Joseph Tarlow, Sidney Tobias, and Leonora Yanovich. If you're thinking of anyone this morning we didn't mention, now would be the time to mention their names at home or simply to hold your loved ones' names in your heart. I'll invite the mourners to join me on page 598 as you recite the Mourner's Kaddish. Yitkadal v'yitkadash shemei rabbah, ve'alma divrach yirtei ve'amlich malchutei, v'chayichon v'yomechon v'chayei dechol beit Yisrael, ba'alav izman kari v'imru amen. Yehei shemei rabbah mevarach le'alam le'almei almaya. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitba'ar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh, v'yitadar v'yitaleh v'yitalal shemei dekudsha b'richu. Leila min kol birchata v'shirata tushbechata v'nechamata da'amiran be'alma v'yimru amen. Yehei shalom araba min shemaya v'chaim aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'yimru amen. Oseh shalom b'mromav, hu yaseh shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'yimru amen. Zichronam livracha, may every one of their memories be for a blessing. Please be seated at home if you're still standing. Shabbat shalom, everybody. Some important announcements to share with you. And again, to please join us for Torah study, which will begin at 12 o'clock on Zoom. Again, if you don't know how to access it, please let me know. We welcome all to our Torah study, again at 12 o'clock. A reminder that next Shabbat will be Shabbat in which we will study using Torah Women's Commentary, and we're very excited to be able to do that each month. So again, to remember next Shabbat for Torah study and Women's Torah Commentary. Also, upcoming this week, Nina Mitzvah will meet on Monday at 11:30, Hebrew School at 4 o'clock the same day. The Social Justice Committee will also have its regular meeting at 5 o'clock on Monday, and the Musar Practice Group at 7 o'clock with Myra. My class on Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel and the Prophets will meet on Wednesday at 12 o'clock, and B'nai Mitzvah will meet at 4 o'clock later that afternoon. On Friday at 9 o'clock, my class on Pirkei Avot as well. Coming up for March, we really have a very, very filled month, so check your e-blast, check your calendar for everything that's going on, but a few things to highlight. We have wine tastings, we have classes, tours, art shows, because it's also the month in which we will celebrate Pesach. We have 2 virtual Seders this year. We have the annual Women's Seder, and of course, every year sponsored by the Women's Rosh Chodesh group, and also and that's on Sunday, March 14th. And of course, we have our community Passover Seder on the second night of Pesach that will be hosted by me and very likely some elements of my family, including my wife and children. We'll see how that goes. That'll be, of course, Sunday, March 28th. Both are open to members, their family, and friends. So keep an eye out for all of the links to be able to access all of that great stuff. And also, I think it's not on my list here, but just to let you guys know, tomorrow, God willing with the weather, we'll see. But we arranged for a car parade for Purim. This is all Shelley's idea. It's really wonderful at Havens Beach. So we have some of our Hebrew School families dressing up in their cars, dressing their cars up even, and then we're going to hand out some hamantashen and give them a good post-Purim little bit of love. So in any case, that will be going on tomorrow. We hope with the weather happening the way that it is, it'll still take place. But as I said last night, it's good for everyone to know these things are going on because this is all part of our community, which is just wonderful. So again, wish you a Shabbat Shalom, whether you'll be joining us for Torah study or not. And if I won't see you at Torah study, I wish you a wonderful week, hopefully to be safe for all of us. And before we get to Kiddush, we're going to first do our closing song for the morning, Ein Keloheinu, page 626. Ein Keloheinu, Ein Kadoneinu, Ein Kemalkeinu, Ein Kemoshienu, Mich Eloheinu, Mich Adoneinu, Michem Alkeinu, Michem Moshienu, Nodel Eloheinu, Nodel Adonenu, Nodel Malkeinu, Nodel Moshienu, Baruch Eloheinu, Baruch Adonenu, Baruch Malkeinu, Baruch Moshienu, Atahu Eloheinu, Atahu Adonenu, Atahu Malkeinu, Atahu Moshienu. We'll turn now to page 604. If you have some grape juice or wine handy, you can join me again, page 604, Kiddush. Veshamru b'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat, לעשות את השבת לדורותם ברית עולם. ביני ובין בני ישראל אותי לעולם, אותי לעולם. ושמרו בני ישראל את השבת, לעשות את השבת לדורותם ברית עולם. כי ששת ימים עשה אדוני את השמיים ואת הארץ, ושמרו בני ישראל את השבת, לעשות את השבת לדורותם ברית עולם. וביום השביעי שבת וינפש, שבת וינפש, שבת וינפש, ושמרו בני ישראל את השבת, לעשות את השבת לדורותם ברית עולם. על כן ברך אדוני את יום השבת ויקדשהו ספרי. ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם, בורא פרי הגפן. Amen. Chaim to you, Shabbat Shalom to you, and as I said, I hope I'll see you for Torah study in a few minutes, but if not, have a wonderful rest of your Shabbat, a restful Shabbat I hope, and a restful rest of your week, and take care, be safe, and Shabbat Shalom.